Hey everybody, welcome back to the Plays and Fades YouTube channel. I'm your host, Gordo Gambles, and welcome back to their full card breakdown. This time for UFC Vegas 100. We had our 100th Apex event, an interesting one to say the least, headlined by Carlos Prates versus Neil Magny in what is a 12-fight card, some decent ones on tap, and like I mentioned, the 100th one here, the centennial mark here without a crowd. And you know, as much as you like having the crowd, it's cool to see 100 events. At least, I don't know, I'm trying to make a case for it, but still, there were some fights nonetheless. 12 fights after a couple of them have fell off the card, unfortunately, but I'm excited to talk about them nonetheless. I do think we have some decent opportunities to go out here to make some money. Last week's UFC Edmonton card was a pretty good one from a draft perspective. Hoping to replicate that this week. Before I jump in, make sure to like button down below, subscribe to the channel, check out CoolBet for my best bets of the week, as well as checking out Established Run for my full card DraftKings premium content over there. Without wasting any more time, let's do this. We get the fight night started with the return of the 4-2 Tresean Gore versus the 12-4 Antonio Trocoli. A very interesting fight to get the night started between two guys who are usually going out there putting on pretty entertaining fights, but most importantly, the return of Tresean Gore, the guy who was supposed to go out there, win the Ultimate Fighter, has had a little bit of a rocky start to the UFC, but now he's back. Last time we saw him, he was snatching the neck of Josh Ryan, one of the most hellacious submissions we've seen in a long time, but he's one of those guys who did look to have decent skill set, a ton of power, that was never in doubt, but a guy who looked like he was kind of too raw. I mean, he's still only 4-2, and he's a guy who kind of lacks the volume you'd like to see from him. Has had issues in the grappling game as well. And although he has a ton of power on the feet and has decent forward pressure, is maybe a little bit reluctant to go forward at all times. Now, being that he's young and still developing and still pretty new in his career, I do like the fact that he can mix in takedowns as well. We know he has that power on the feet. I do think he has a decent ceiling for UFC success, but there's a ton of question marks around him. He's facing Antonio Trocoli this week, who did make his UFC debut against Share a Bullet there in a fight where he did go out there and lose, but did look okay. He seems to be a primary grappler, a big dude for the division. Let's not get me wrong there, but a guy who, aside from that really solid grappling, lacks a lot on the feet, is there to be hit, showed decent durability last time, but still very hittable on the feet, kind of weird, lackluster striking, and not the best wrestling to always get it there. When I mean unorthodox striking, it's kind of like there's not much of it. He's able to throw hands sometimes, but really looping shots, not that technical, more so relies on the leg kicks, and does want to get this fight to the ground. On the ground, I do think he has the advantage over Gore here, but I am going to side with Gore. Let me please preface this by saying this is not a very high confidence pick. This fight's a pretty interesting one because, you know what, you don't really want to back Tresean Gore at chalk. He's not the best fighter to back to do so, but I do think, and if you look at their overall skill sets as a whole, I do favor Gore's development in the fight game. I favor his strike in the feet by a large margin, his power, and I think he has the physicality to stay upright. Now, yes, Trocoli can have him go down there, get the takedowns, have submission success, but I really think that's what he's limited to. So aside from that path, I do think it's Gore who's winning the optics on the feet, who has the physicality to win the clinch exchanges as well. And adding in that Gore's had this layoff to hopefully go out there and make some improvements, hopefully be healthier, whereas Trocoli's getting arrested and he's doing these weird legal issues. I do favor Gore's mentality in as well. So not the most confident pick. I don't think Gore's a guy I really want to go out there and trust at chalk, but I do think he has a better overall skill set, and I will be picking him in this matchup this weekend. DraftKings-wise, this could be an interesting one because Gore always has a ton of power. At 8.6K, we know he can stop a fight in an instant, so I think he is a viable GPP option, but I think that's kind of what I'm limiting to this fight too. Trocoli, as well, as I mentioned, could have some submission success, but aside from their boom or bust options, the longer this fight goes, the more I think it could be an ugly one. I mean, he went out last time, scored 94 points, which is not bad for 8.6K, but if we look to see the style he brings, he does have moment-winning ability, but not the most volume, not the most wrestling, and his style doesn't really score well to DraftKings. I think, if anything, he is a solid GPP tournament option in this mid-range, but that's really what he's limited to. Same thing with Trocoli. I'll have some ownership of him because when he does win, I do think it's wrestling, grappling, submission-based, so I will have some exposure to him. But considering I think Gore wins, and likely in what is an extended fight, I will pick him and not really be the heaviest in this fight on DraftKings. Next up, we have the 9-2 Cortavious Are You Not Entertained Romious versus the 7-4 Gaston the Dream Killer Bolanos. Had to throw the nicknames for them too. It is a pretty fun nickname matchup and a pretty fun one because it is a Cortavious Romious fight. This guy is extremely electric. Went on the Dana White Contender Series last time. Lost his first one, was able to get redemption the second time out, and this guy's fun to watch. He's extremely killer to be killed. A lot of flashy kicks on the feet, is always going out there, looking to throw the fight, any intention, looking to close the distance, and wants to take you down to the ground. On the mat, he's pretty violent down there, let's put it that way. Decent submission game, but very physically imposing as well in the clinch position. Although he lacks a lot of this technicality you want to see, he's fun, he's entertaining, and he's willing to brawl. Very good in and out movement, solid power as well, but he does leave a lot of openings. He's not the best technically, and people who are sharper counter strikers can go out there and counter him, which is kind of what Bolanos is. It makes for a very fun matchup. Bolanos is not that same flashy submission grappler or kicker, but he is a guy who will spin. He's a guy who is a much better technical striker, and that's kind of what he is. 6 to 7 wins by knockout. A guy wants to go out there and throw in the feet, and a guy who does have decent power to go in there and do so. I think it makes for a pretty fun stylistic matchup, because there's no doubt about it, the better technical striker here is Gaston Bolanos. I think he has the ability to mix in kicks, counter Cortavious Romious, a guy who will really enter the pocket recklessly. But I think aside from that, I think the guy winning the moments here with the in and out movement and but the clinch and ground exchanges as well is going to be the Cortavious Romious. So it could come down to a true striker versus grappler matchup if both these guys are getting to their ideal game plans. Because of that, a fight I probably want to take the under in for some violence props, but one where I did slightly lean to Cortavious Romious, not where one I'm going to back him at chalk. I think actually the value's on the underdog here, but I do think he is someone who the UFC is setting up to succeed. They like his style. He's got a cool nickname too, and a guy who really wants to go out there and implement all facets of his MMA game. He does want to go out there, utilize the takedowns. If it does hit the mat, I do favor him to a pretty high extent here, and even on the feet, although Bolanos is way more technical, I do think Romious can have success to land the big, powerful shots as he enters. He does swing with fight-ending intention, so I think there's more paths for Romious to get it done. I would not be surprised if Bolanos went out there, countered him, and got an early knockout of his own right, but I did end up picking Romious. However, that is the reason I do love this fight on DraftKings. Romious making his debut, but both his fights so far under the UFC banner and Dana White Contender Series did score very, very well. I do like his style at 8.7K to have not only grappling success, but some finishing optics and a very fast fight pace as well. Whereas I do think, like I said, Bolanos has that ability to counter. I do think he can win this fight by knockout. So 7.5K, I don't mind some Bolanos as well. These first two fights of the night are fights I am looking to target on DraftKings. This one more than the other one. I did pick Mr. Are You Not Entertained Romious, but I do think there is some value on the dog this week. Phenomenal fight. Next up, we have the 6-1 Melissa Mullins versus the 6-1 Claudio Sygula. Sygula making a debut here, and one where I was a bit shocked to see her make this debut. Didn't recognize the name that much. I will say, pretty good looking girl. I have to throw that out there. That's maybe why she got the call here to the UFC, but someone who doesn't look to really excel. Not someone who I see threatening for the title anytime soon. When you're getting these signings, a couple types of signings. There's the Fatima Kleins, so you're like, damn, this girl could be something. Then you got your Claudio Sygula, so you're like, damn. And that's about it. All right, so I think this is a fun fight here. I think she is someone who does have promise because she is aggressive. I think she can win fights at the lower level, but she has a lot of flaws. I think her level of competition is atrocious. I think she can be held down against the mat as well. And even on the feet, although she's aggressive, I do think she should be countered. I don't think this is the right weight class for her as well. And I think all these things combined lead to her having some flaws. I think at a fundamental level, maybe against Melissa Mullins, she can go out there, be aggressive with her optics, potentially mixing takedowns as well, and land the more damaging moments. But unfortunately, I did side with Melissa Mullins here. This is very similar to the last one where I'm picking the favorite, although the value might be in the underdog here, because although Mullins is the fighter I'm picking to win here, she has her flaws in her own right. She was just knocked out last time. I think her striking is still improving. However, I favor the level of competition of Mullins. She is someone who will look to take this fight down to the ground, and I have seen Sygula taken down and controlled there. Additionally, when Mullins is down there, she's extremely aggressive, will look to throw elbows. Maybe the 12-6 elbows will benefit her as well here. And I do think she's going to be the bigger fighter of the two. Sygula is someone who looks like she can maybe be outsized out there. Doesn't always look like the biggest 135er, whereas Mullins going out here missing weight a lot of the time here at 135. So I think for the size, the physicality, and the ground game Mullins, but if this fight stays on the feet, I think Sygula is live. I don't think Mullins is that good of a fighter to back at chalk. However, I did end up siding with Melissa Mullins here. Because of that, though, I think her path to victory could score very, very well on DraftKings. I've talked very highly of these three matchups on DraftKings so far, but we're going to continue doing so here. 8.8K Melissa Mullins. She has not really lived up to the hype so far from a DraftKings perspective, but grappling path to victory means someone who has fought a horrible level of competition, for someone who can be taken down, for someone who I think can be grounded out as well. The path to victory for DraftKings success is there for Melissa Mullins, and I will be playing some of her 8.8K. She's one of my favorite contrarian plays in the mid-range. I do think she has some finishing opportunities in this fight here, and I do think her path to victory scores phenomenal on DraftKings. Flip side of things, Sygula not getting to her too often. Of course, she's able to go out there and get that win the same way that Kalnada did last time, but I have not really seen the most from her to really want to back her on this spot here. Picking Mullins, the line may be why I don't want to trust her at chalk, but I do think she is a phenomenal DraftKings play. I'd much rather play her on DraftKings than bet her here. Should be a fun fight. Next up, we have the 21-7-1 Cody Stamann versus the 14-7-1 Damone Blackshear. Interesting matchup here. I do think we have a guy here in Cody Stamann who's been around the block. He's been here for a while, solid vet, 35 years old now, but a guy who is the solid wrestle boxer, right? He used to have a ton of wrestling, used to implement that in a lot of his fights, and some decent hand speed on the feet. However, he has struggled to really combine them two together. Has had some fights where he didn't wrestle enough, has had some fights where he wrestled himself into a guillotine. Like, the guy just really hasn't been able to put it all together, but I do think he has a decent skill set. He's also pretty physically imposing, although he's got a smaller stature and will be at a 4-inch height disadvantage here and an 8-inch reach disadvantage here, is someone who I do think has some stocky nature, is decent takedown defense, and can hold his own despite the height. Blackshear is kind of fed to the wolves because he had that insane twister. He went from having this insane twister winning against Jose Johnson to taking the fight on next week's notice, 1 week notice against Mario Bautista, and then being knocked out early by Montel Jackson. He was kind of this up and down. He's at the peak with that amazing submission and then kind of got brought down to earth, but he still is a pretty good fighter, is a very, very aggressive guy. Very solid wrestling and decent jiu-jitsu, as I mentioned in that submission win there, but a guy who wants to take you down, kind of grind you out. He's still working on that striking, but it's extremely durable, thinks through his position pretty well, has some solid cardio as well, and I do think he has the physicality to win a lot of these fights. I do think Cody Stamann has the tools really to go out here and compete, but at the end of the day, I did end up signing with Blackshear. Not only is the younger fighter who I think the UFC kind of wants to win here, but a guy who I think has the physicality to win a lot of these grappling exchanges. Blackshear will shoot takedowns. I do think if he gets on top, has the size and the grappling to really stifle someone like Stamann, and you add in the reach advantage that he may have on the feet, I do think he has better optics to win this one here. Stamann, if he puts it all together, could have a ton of success, but I don't think necessarily this is the fight to do it. I think that everything Stamann does, Blackshear outmatched him a bit here, so I did side with Blackshear. DraftKings wise, not my favorite one. I mean, we mentioned all the other ones having a ton of drafting implication, a ton of finishing upside, whereas Blackshear has scored decent. This is not the matchup, I think, for him to have a ton of success. He could land takedowns, could have control time, but I think this fight goes to decision a lot of the time. I think a lot of it could be spent on the feet where he uses his striking advantage or his reach advantage per se, but not the one where I want to have him too much. Stamann, if he puts it all together, like I said, could have success, but I haven't seen him do that in a long time, and Blackshear is no easy task at all. So not a fan of getting into too often. The pick is Blackshear, although I do think he'd be more competitive than the line entails. Next up, we have the 9-4 Charles Radtke versus the 11-7 the Jetty Semelsberger. I think Semelsberger has been on a little bit of an up and down himself, a guy who has some solid wins in the UFC, a guy who has a ton of power, a ton of credibility, of a very good fighter, but has kind of like Cody Stamann struggled to put things together and then maybe to a level above. The guy has made a ton of mistakes outside the cage. He's going out there and wrestling when he shouldn't. He is not wrestling when he should, and he's engaging these striking affairs where he's messing up a bit. And I love Sopaj the Jet. I actually was on a live stream with him. He is a very, very kind individual. I respect him very much. But I do think he needs to maybe game plan a bit better for these fights, or go out there and try to implement a better cage, or maybe some better thought process out of the cage, because although he has all these tools, he has also struggled to put it all together. Charles Radtke kind of came onto the scene with a very good win in his first one. Called people some words I can't repeat on air here, and then kind of got a name around him, and the UFC fed him to Carlos Prates, who is headlining this event here. Chuck Buffalo is a solid fighter, pretty well-rounded. I think he's got some very solid striking in the feet. He showed that against Gilbert Urbina, but he also has a phenomenal ground game. We haven't seen that too much in the UFC, but a guy who is willing to take it down the regional scene, black belt down there, is able to scramble really well in positions. A guy who's just pretty well-rounded. In this matchup here, although we have seen Radtke knocked out, I do think Semelsberger has power. I just think I favor the thought process and the well-roundedness of someone like Charles Radtke. I think if Sopaj the Jet brings too much power on the feet, that Radtke can go over here and take him down to the mat. And although I'm not saying with his most conviction, I do think he has a more well-rounded skill set to win this fight here. I think he can keep up in the volume on the feet. I think he can win some minutes with the wrestling and the scrambling on the mat. I did pick Charles Radtke, but the power of Semelsberger is always at large. Because of that grappling success, because of that grappling opportunity, Radtke's another guy who you can go out here and play. It's 8.5K, another mid-range target, very similar to a Trayshawn Gore kind of thing. I do think his path to victory can go out here and land takedowns. Semelsberger has knockout power, 7.7. He has showed that before, scoring 102 against Matthews, 126 against Sano, 126 against Witt. But at the end of the day, picking Radtke, I will have more ownership of him. Should be a fun fight. And the Dana White Contender Series alum here, Mansour Abdul Malik, 6-0, taking on the 12-4 Dusko Todorovic. This one should be another fun fight. I said a lot about these fights on the card, but it honestly is a decently entertaining card here. Mansour Abdul Malik, former collegiate wrestler, a very, very physically imposing guy who, that undefeated record, man, is something to go look at. All of his wins coming to the distance, is super aggressive, wants to go out there, land takedowns, and utilize what is some of the most impressive ground and pound you'll ever see. When he's on top position, he is deadly. He throws hammer fists, he throws elbows, he throws a ton of power. The power he generates is almost unreal down there. He is a typical wrestle boxer, though. On the feet does not look that comfortable. As a guy who I think is still improving, that game is still pretty raw, but once he gets his hand locked to view, he is super physically imposing, is very strong, and when he's on top position, is a threat to finish the fight at all times. His cardio is still in question, his level of competition is in question, but a guy who has his bread and butter, has his path to victory, and executes it very, very well. Todorovic, we have not seen in a while. He's coming off actually an injury in one of those matchups. He's a guy who has been a bit hit or miss as well. I think offensively, this guy could be a threat. A ton of power, very good aggression early on, and a guy who does have some decent wins on his record in the regional scene. But defensively, he defends takedowns at a pretty poor rate. He gets hit a lot. He's been knocked out a lot in the UFC as well, keeping his head on the center line with that tall man's defense. And his defensive metrics aren't good. Offensively, with that size, that reach, the decent power he has on the feet, I do think he will be the better striker, but without the ability to go out there and defend takedowns, without the ability to react to strikes very well, and all the injury history he's had, he is a very, very tough fighter to back. Because of that, I do think Malik will get his hands locked, get the takedowns, and look to just rain ground and pound here. And I do favor Abdul Malik to get this fight done. I think the power is no joke. I think he will be able to get that wrestling going early. And although I have my questions of what happens late, I don't really think Dusko has the defensive metrics to put up with the early surge that Mansour is going to bring. So I am taking Abdul Malik to get it done early. Because of that, phenomenal play on DraftKings, 9.3K. He will shoot takedowns. He has first round win equity. He has a ton of knockout and knockdown opportunities as well. He's going to throw from the hip, and I do think he's a very, very dangerous fighter to have. So 9.3K, I'll be playing a ton of Mansour Abdul Malik, one of my favorite tournament plays. Todorovic could be a punt play if you want to go out there. I mean, if he wins, it's probably because Mansour Abdul Malik is tired, or it's because Todorovic having more striking success. So he is a punt play that I do like more than people below him. However, I do think Malik's able to get it done more times than not. So we're picking him to win. I think he adds to the undefeated record, and he is someone to look out for in this division. And then we have the short notice replacement, the 7-0 Zach Scroggin stepping in to face the 24-8-1 Elizo Zaleski dos Santos. And Scroggin's not a name I recognize too much either. Looks like he trains with the Garrett Armfields and Trey Hawkins of the world, not too far from me, but a guy who looks to be like a solid Midwest prospect. 7-0, undefeated, 5 wins by finish. Everything looks okay. You look into it a bit more though, and there are some question marks about the guy. Really low of competition. His striking looks a little bit weird. The fact that he is not defending strikes too well. He is so offense-oriented, a guy who I think is able to be hurt by a lot of fighters, especially by maybe the leg kicks of someone like Elizo dos Santos here. But a guy who does have some decent grappling shall go there. I do think he has solid power, and I do think he is someone who can have some success here in the UFC against low level of competition, but this is a dangerous opponent to face early on. Dos Santos has been around forever. 17 of 24 wins coming to the distance is extremely dangerous, and we all remember what happened last time he fought someone on short notice, right? He went out there and just decimated Benoit Saint Denis, a guy who had title aspirations and maybe still does in his own right, but a guy who was just on short notice and was too much too soon. Zaleski dos Santos is an absolute tank. He's a ton of power on the feet, is very good takedown defense as well, and decent jiu-jitsu shall it go there, but a guy who looks to just pick you apart technically, very good spinning kicks as well, knocked out Sean Strickland, and has fought an elite level of competition. He is still someone who I think is extremely powerful, and getting this fight in your debut is no easy task. I agree with the line being the way it is. I think Zaleski dos Santos should be a large favorite. I think he's just too much too soon for someone like Scroggin, and I like the competition Zaleski has faced. However, the problem we have here is as much as I'm picking Zaleski dos Santos, and as much as I think he wins, he's 8K on DraftKings. He is the free square this week. Although last time he said that was Jake Hadley. That didn't go too well. This time, vet like Zaleski dos Santos, who has a lot of wins on his record, a ton of power, very good takedown defense, at 8K is a guy we'll be investing in, a guy who I will have along my DraftKings lineups, and a guy who will be extremely popular. You almost have to play him at minus 500 at 8K. However, if you're looking to be different, this is definitely the way to go out there and do so. He does have some poor scoring performances, 49 points in a win against Nurmagomedov. That's probably not going to happen here. He is expected to inside the distance. So a guy who should go out there and score very well. 8K, chalk play, kind of a free square this week, but someone I will be looking to play. I do think he gets it done in what is a too soon matchup for Scroggin here. Starting off the main card, we have the 14-8 Jillian Robertson versus the 11-3 Luana Pinheiro. The Canadian card was last week, but yet we have probably our best Canadian fighter here in Jillian Robertson, someone who's been at the top for a while, ton of submission records, and someone who's looking to add to it here. We all know what Jillian is. She's a phenomenal jiu-jitsu girl. She wants to take people down and submit them, and she's phenomenal when she's able to get it down there. Has been in a very good run recently at this new weight class. Looks like her takedown offense is improving. She's able to go out there, land the takedowns, and from top position, she's extremely dominant. When you're able to stop the takedowns, you can beat Jillian Robertson on the feet. There's no doubt about it, but she's crafty. She's always looking to take people down. She looks to have the physicality to do so at this weight class, and she's one of the most dangerous women in this division. Luana Pinheiro, a bit of an up and down streak. She looks to be a very solid judoka, have the ability to go out there, land powerful shots on the feet as well, land those takedowns, have some a pretty well-rounded skill set, but her cardio has been in question. Her striking defense is definitely there, and she is someone who ends up on the ground in a lot of positions, which is really not what you want to do against Jillian Robertson. And it's kind of the tale of two fighters here. Pinheiro's kind of going in the weaker direction. Jillian's been looking really good recently, so maybe the line is wider because of that. But I have to go with my Canadian girl here in Jillian Robertson. I think she's going to have the clear advantage on the mat and the cardio as well. And Pinheiro, although a pretty good offensive wrestler, can be taken down in her own right and is someone who can also be hit. So with the durability Jillian has shown, I think she can eat a couple of shots in the feet. I think she can get this one in the clinch, take her down, and look to work the submission game. She is so dangerous from top position and one of the most brilliant jiu-jitsu minds we've seen here in the UFC. So give me Jalen Robertson. I do think she can get done by submission because that solid play, 9.2K. Last win scored 102 and 105. One by decision, one by sub. I think she's a very good fighter here with a lot of takedown upside, submission upside, and is just a threat to finish the fight at any time. So solid play, 9.2K. I do think she gets it done. Next up, the debut of the 17-2 Reinier de Ridder versus the 37-17 GM3. And I don't mean the debut of GM3. We all know who he is, a longtime staple of the UFC. Ton of memorable fights, ton of memorable comeback wins. We love GM3. But no, we're talking about Reinier de Ridder, the former 2-weight class 1 champion, a guy who is extremely dangerous, a very physically imposing guy with a ton of power on his feet, but also a phenomenal submission game with 11 of his 17 wins coming by submission. I mean, this guy is pretty dangerous. He is someone who wants to go out there and look to finish on the mat. That's ironic because he is going out there and facing a guy like Mearshart. And I think that the signing of RDR is pretty impressive because he is someone who has fought at a high level, is someone who I do think is pretty impressive. And his GM3 test is perfect because GM3 is no easy task. If he's still in there late, he's going to try to fight for this win. He has a ton of comeback wins, but he's beatable. Like I love GM3, but he's very hittable on the feet. His chin is a question mark. He can be taken down because he's still willing to play off his back. And even though he's a phenomenal jiu-jitsu master on the ground, he can still be taken down. He's not the most physically imposing. There are paths to beat GM3. And because of that, I did end up signing with the debutant here in RDR. I do think he has the ability to go out there, land takedowns, utilize his physicality, and stay safe. I mean, he is so good on the mat himself, and I do think he's able to survive the attacks that GM3 has. And I do think, even at that, on the feet, I do think RDR throws with more power. I think he's the ability to go out there, land the damaging shots, and potentially finish someone like GM3 who has been hit so many times before. So I did pick RDR. Should be a fun fight. 9.1K. I don't mind him here because I do think he has finishing optics against a guy in GM3 who has been finished so many times before, whereas we all know that GM3 is going to be a punt play this week. He has a lot of come from behind victories. 86 against Shabazian, 100 against Muradov, 60 against Stolfis. You got the whole range of them, and I do think he's a punt play to win this fight. I just think RDR is too sound and too physically imposing to get submitted down low. It's certainly a possibility, but one I'm not putting too much stock into. I did pick the Ridder here. As much as I love GM3, I do think he's able to go out there, utilize that physicality and ground game to win this fight here. Next up, 12-4 Ricky Turcios versus the 11-3 Bernardo Sopaj. Sopaj came onto the scene, short notice, had a phenomenal fight. Looked like he was going to win the fight as an underdog. And then got highlight of the year. He just got absolutely highlighted. Like flying knee KO, one of the most incredible knockouts you've ever seen. Poor guy, because he was doing so well. He's still young, 24 years old. He's still making improvements, but took a big task going out there on short notice, and he looked great. Phenomenal wrestling, phenomenal ability to keep up on the feet as well. He did tire, which maybe we can attribute to short notice here, but a guy who definitely belongs in the UFC. He's facing Ultimate Fighter champion Ricky Turcios, a guy who has a ton of volume, is kind of like a Tasmanian devil out there. The way he's going out there, landing so many strikes, is so aggressive, can scramble on the mat as well, is always working, and always a threat to look to tire you out. And maybe that could be a factor here as this fight goes on. Maybe Turcios has the ability to tire out Sopaj and land some success later, but I have to favor Sopaj here. Although Turcios has a ton of volume, a ton of activity, I favor the technicality of Sopaj, the moments he's able to win, and although Turcios is so good at scrambling, he is there to be taken down, and Sopaj did look like he can work through his transitions pretty well. So I like the youth, the physicality, the power, and the transitions of Sopaj, and I do think he's able to win this fight. Now, I think this line is wide because, I mean, Turcios is always going to be there. He's extremely durable. I think he'll pop right back up and he's going to make him work. So Turcios does have a chance to win this one, but I think that's only going to allow for Sopaj's DraftKings score to improve. A ton of takedown repetition, ton of volume on the feet as well. He was going to score 85 points in a win last time. I think he can score even more here against Turcios. I do not mind Sopaj. I like him more than a Blackshear below him, but on a card like this with so many solid options, I won't be getting to him too often. This will probably be more of a cash play because I don't think Turcios finishes him here. Turcios down low could be a decent play because he's going to throw so much volume. He would have put up 90 points in a really close decision against Brady Haystack because he throws so much volume. I think the activity could lead him to score well, but I don't think he wins. So 7.2K, not getting to him too often. However, I will sprinkle him in. The pick is Sopaj. Should be a phenomenal fight. Then we have the 16-8 Karolina Kowalkiewicz versus the 9-3 Denise Gomes. I'll say it right now, I'm not the biggest Denise Gomes fan, but she's a pretty good fighter. Last time she was able to come close against Angela Hill is someone who just has a ton of power. She'll look to stalk you, land those overhand shots, is extremely powerful, and always looking to knock your lights out. She's got really good physicality, and although she doesn't have the most technicality or doesn't have the most defensive ability, is going to crash the pocket, is going to swing heavy, and is extremely dangerous at all times. She's facing someone like Karolina Kowalkiewicz who kind of had a clear career resurgence, right? Lost 5 in a row at one point, but came back, has some solid wins. But now it's kind of getting to that point again where, yes, she had those wins, but she's not really a title contender. She's 39 years old. She has a ton of volume, and she's able to win minutes a lot of the time, but she loses to a lot of these physical fighters. Lucindo, even Penne armbarred her there. Yan Xiaonan, Claudia Gadelia, Jessica Andrade, like a lot of these fighters who are able to bully her, potentially even take her down as well, are having success. And she's facing the bully of the weight class here in Denise Gomes, who's going to crash the pockets, look to swing heavy. And I do think she has the opportunity to hurt an older fighter who is 15 years older than her here in Karolina Kowalkiewicz. Do I want to play Gomes at chalk? Probably not, but do I think she wins this fight? Yes, I do. I think she has the power, the optics, the moment-winning ability to get it done here, and she is my pick to win. Now, Gomes is not perfect. I do think there is a world where Kowalkiewicz can have some success, keep it close, maybe even wrestle a bit. So for some reason, 6.8K, I'll have a tiny bit of her just due to some variance, but more times than not, I think Gomes wins this fight. She's able to land the bigger shots, and she's a play I like. I don't like her as much as Abdul, Malik, and Prates, so I won't be getting to her too much as DraftKings, but a viable play if you want to get different, a viable 9.4 contrarian play. 132 against Uruguay, 131 against Brazil. When she wins, she's scoring pretty well, but I do like the other options around her. A solid play up top. I do think she wins at a pretty high clip, but definitely not a must play on DraftKings. Then our main event, the 29-12 Neil Magny versus the 26 Carlos Prates. Prates catapulted to main event stardom here, and he deserves it. He has looked phenomenal so far in here in the UFC. 3 wins here, 3 knockouts, an additional knockout on the Contender Series. The guy's looked amazing, and I said it right from that Contender Series spot. I'm definitely not the first one to say it. A lot of people agreed with me here, but this guy's striking is unbelievable. You saw it there in the Contender Series. He has such good head movement. He's able to make reads as the fight goes on. A ton of power at the end of those strikes as well, and he's just flows with it. He's got such a good striking state in there. Is able to put on good pressure, a solid head kick as well, very good 1-2 down the middle. The guy is powerful. First knockout loss to Li Jingyang, the ability to read and knock out Charles Radtke to the body there. This guy is good. He is fun. One of the best strikers we've seen in this division. This guy's a monster. He's facing someone, Neil Magny, who's been around forever. I mean, he derailed the boy Mike Malott. I don't know. Sad to say, but a guy who's just always in there. That kind of really exemplifies who Neil Magny is. He's always in the fight, is kind of the gatekeeper of the division, is always looking to go out there and really test to see how good you really are. Ton of heart, ability to wrestle if you can as well, solid length, great cardio, and a guy who will put a test on for you. The issue we have here, though, is we have seen him picked apart of range by people like Ian Gary, by people like Michael Morales. He's definitely losing a little bit of his steam being in the game for so long, being 37 years old, and now facing a technical killer like someone like Carlos Prates. I do think Prates will make his read, and I do think he can knock out someone like Neil Magny. Neil Magny is super tough. We'll have to see, but I do think Prates is the real deal, and I do think he makes his reads and gets a later finish on Neil Magny. Question comes down, though, is 9.6K. Yes, he scored 112 and 106 last time, but 9.6K for a guy who's not going to grapple, not necessarily the biggest volume guy, but a guy who's kind of reliant on the knockdowns. He is extremely boomer bust. Yes, he got 2 last time, scored 112, but without that, no, like I said, no grappling upside. He needs an early finish. So if he gets a second or third round finish, does he live off his salary at 9.6K? I'm not too sure. He is extremely boomer bust. And although I'm scared to fade him, and I will have some of him because he's such a solid play and he should win this fight at a high clip, and not a guy I'm really necessarily banking on, I kind of prefer the first round upside of someone like Abdul Malik, who will wrestle, and I do think there's other ways to go. So I like Prates. He should get it done, but he's extremely boomer bust, so do not force him into your lineups if you don't have to. However, I do think he wins. That's going to do it for me here, though, on the Plays and Fades YouTube channel. I'm quickly running through my quick picks. This was an extremely chalky card for me. I'm not going to lie. I'm going to give it to you straight. I'm not going to force the underdogs. That's who I saw winning, and we do have Carlos Prates, Denise Gomes, Bernardo Sopaj, Renier de Ritter, Julian Robertson, Laszlo Zaleski dos Santos, Mansour Abdul Malik, Charles Radtke, Damon Blackshear, Melissa Mullins, Cortavius Romious, and Trayshawn Gore. I picked all favorites. That's crazy. I do think some of those lines are wide. If you had to pick some underdogs to win, probably Bolanos or even Stamann, I think keeps it close, but those are my quick picks there. DraftKings wise, like I said, you do not have to force in Prates. I love Mansour Abdul Malik. I love Melissa Mullins as a contrarian play in that mid-range. But I do think Robertson and de Ritter are phenomenal plays up top due to their grappling abilities. In that mid-range, Gore's a phenomenal punt play. Zaleski dos Santos is going to have a ton of ownership, and rightfully so. He is kind of that free square this week at 8K. You're kind of have to get into your roster. And underdog-wise, I kind of like Bolanos due to countering upside. I think Trocoli can have some ground success. But then in the bottom, I think the volume of Turcios could loom large here. I think if you have to punt to Kowalkiewicz due to some potential volume and staying in this fight, you definitely can. But the punt plays are Mearshart due to late finish upside, Todorovic due to late finish upside. This is not the best card for underdogs. I'll probably build my lineups around that free square Zaleski dos Santos, some countering opportunities of Bolanos, and then look to play that mid-range instead of forcing Pratos in. Try to target this mid-range, get a bit different. Betting-wise, nothing locked in so far, but check me out on Twitter at GamblesGordo to see my full card of bets. Like I said, check out Coolbet, check out a style to run, use code Gordo in both those places there. I appreciate you all for tuning in. Make sure to like button down below, subscribe to the channel. I wish you all the best of luck on your DraftKings and betting endeavors. Let's make some money, guys.